You're welcome back to Secure the Continent. Burkina Faso's defense minister denounced what he said was an international coalition lined up against his country and alleged there had been violations of the country's airspace. Pressure is mounting on the authorities after more than 150 civilians were massacred by uniformed men in villages in northern Burkina Faso. There are details for you in this package. Take a listen.
The Burkinabe army has rejected claims that it played a role in the massacre of civilians on the 20th of April. The country's military insists that there is an international coalition against the Burkinabe as a result of its recent relationship with Russia. Although international and local reports have pointed fingers to the Burkinabe and Russia paramilitary group Wagner for the massacre of more than 100 people in Kama, northern Burkina Faso, the country's military and leaders have rejected such claims. Amnesty International has also accused Burkina Faso of sponsoring an attack against its civilians in a massacre that killed nearly 50 children. In narrations reviewed by Amnesty International, the military attacks the civilians because they failed to desert their town after an attack by terrorist organization Ansarul Islam. The Burkinabe army has denied and is staying true to its innocence, but in the face of an issue fast becoming worrisome, the question many around Africa are asking is, who killed civilians in Burkina Faso?
Now, joining me on the program tonight to discuss all of this, I have Mousbaou Shittou, is a journalist that joins us live from the Burkina Faso capital, Ouagadougou. I also have Dr. Lassanr Ouedraogo, a research fellow at the Center for Development and Democracy, joins in live from Abuja, Nigeria, and also Chris Kwaja, Associate Professor, Center for Peace and Security Studies at Modibbo, Adama University, Yola, Northeast Nigeria. One welcome to you, gentlemen, and thanks for joining me on the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'd like to start with Dr. Ouedraogo. Dr. Ouedraogo, can you provide a detailed account of what happened? What exactly happened during the recent massacre in Kama in northern Burkina Faso? What information do we have? Because, I mean, there have been accusations on all sides. What do we know about the attackers and their motives?
Apparently, from what we have been able to assess from both witness accounts on social media, but also government reports of what happened is that on that earlier day, the 20th or the 21st of last month, so some men in military uniforms have showed up at that village, and they were actually welcomed by the villagers who were running toward them, welcoming them, only to be welcomed with fire. So a lot of people were killed, and the official record now is over 140 people who were buried. That include young men, babies, women, and elderly as well. So they were killed almost indiscriminately in that town, that village. So which begs the question of who is the perpetrator of such crime. The villagers and the witnesses only knows that the people who perpetrated the crime are wearing military fatigues, military uniforms that appear to be Burkinabe military gears. And the officials in Burkina are saying, no, wait a minute, our men are not capable of doing such type of crime because we need to do investigation before we are able to determine who actually did this. Because the fact of the matter is that a lot of people actually have Burkinabe military uniforms. And in the past, some terrorists were arrested in possession of the military uniforms. So right now, the situation remains confused, although there has been calls here and there to condemn the Burkinabe military for these attacks. On the ground, there's a lot of conversation going on between the military, but also between the locals trying to make sense of what just happened in that specific town. And what is important to also specify is that this is not a town where people were not in support of the regime. These are people who are actually actively in support of the regime, from what we have been able to get from media posts and from witness accounts.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ouedraogo. Mousbaou, the million-dollar question is who done it? Who is responsible for this attack? Amnesty International has pointed fingers at the Burkina army. And like Dr. Ouedraogo said, what will be the motivation for a professional army to open arms, to open fire on its own people? So, Mousbaou, what evidence is there that the Burkina security forces were responsible for the attacks in Kama, as claimed by Amnesty International? And what is the government in Ouagadougou, what's been the official response to these allegations?
Thank you so much. Well, we have really witnessed the situation with sadness. What happened on the 21st of March in Kama? Well, it's a city of Ekromabad in Kama. It's really a bad situation where more than 100 people have been killed by men in military uniforms. Well, this is what people have been saying is maybe the army, maybe terrorists using the uniform. But according to some information we get now from our private intelligence service, some said they were given attack in that area not far from Kama in March, where the army have traced some terrorists, and those people have been kept by the population of Kama. They have been covered by the population of Kama, and this was a frustration for some militaries, and which could lead to this situation that we all witnessed. But we all believe that, we now be talking about the army. Their first job is to protect the population and their properties, and we would like really to give the benefit of that to those armies. And well, a file has been opened at the level of justice to really, do some investigation to find out what really happened and who are those people who really did the job. But we got an official reaction to that. Yesterday, the president were talking to journalists, and on this issue, he said, well, we cannot say it's the army, and we cannot say it's not the army, but we believe the army cannot do the job because it's not the job to kill the population, the civilians. Then we just wait to have proof, but until now, we don't have proof that is the army. And this is not the first time.
But Amnesty International is saying it's the army. What evidence did they provide?
The evidence is just those people are in the military uniforms.
Okay.
And this is not the first time that you have terrorist actions in Burkina with terrorism uniform. I think this is the second or the third time that we have this kind of issue. Okay. And secondly, according to what some people said, as I said earlier, there was a given attack around Kama, and the population of Kama really protects those terrorists and find places to accommodate them.
Thank you, Mousbaou. I'd like to bring in Dr. Kwaja in Yola at this point in time. Thank you very much for joining the program, Dr. Chris Kwaja. My question to you is this. Can you give us a context and a background to how we got here in the first place? How did Burkina Faso go from being spared of most of the jihadist attacks in the Sahel to the epicenter in less than a decade? Because when Blaise Compaoré was president, you hardly heard of terrorist attacks in Burkina Faso, and now every other week there's one attack or the other.
Thank you very much. And it's quite unfortunate that today we are discussing Burkina Faso in this fashion. But the point I need to make quickly is that the situation in Burkina Faso is not unique to Burkina Faso. We have Mali, we have Guinea, where the whole question of instability, the whole question of the unresolved issues of the unconstitutional change of government, the whole issue of the incursion of mercenary groups, particularly the Wagner group, into that region. And all this constitute what you can see as a complex security issue for the entire Sahel region. Now, in the context of Burkina Faso, what we are seeing is that, yes, when Blaise Compaoré was there, those issues were not there, but it is not enough to say, oh, there was stability. It's possible that within the period he was in power, the insurgent groups or the jihadist group or whichever armed group we're talking about was just hibernating within the soft spots that they've identified. And the soft spots are often communities that are defenseless, border communities, that areas that share border between one country to the other. You find a lot of criminality happening within those stretches. But for me, the most important question, regardless of who is in power, is that what are we saying about state responsibility to protect in the context of the unfortunate incidents we've seen in Burkina Faso today? Because if the massacre did not happen, maybe people would not be talking about Blaise Compaoré. But it has happened. It has happened because the state itself has refused to take on its primary responsibility of protecting its own citizens. And I just want to draw our attention to paragraph 138 of the responsibility to protect document of the United Nations, which all countries of the world are signatories to. And that paragraph clearly states that every individual state has the responsibility to protect its population from genocide, from war crimes, from ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. When situations such as the one we are confronted with happens, and the state is living in denial, it means the state has refused to live up to its own responsibility to protect.
Thank you, Dr.
Or the state is complicit in this context and is refusing to accept responsibility, that it has perpetrated crime against its own citizens.
Thank you, Dr. Kwaja. And I would like to pick up from what you said about the state's responsibility to protect. Dr. Ouedraogo, the mutinous soldiers led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the current president of Burkina Faso, who ousted Burkina Faso's Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba last year, vowed they would do a better job at stopping the jihadi violence rocking the country. I mean, it's almost a year later, and we're still witnessing a surge in this violence. The security situation seems to be worse than it was under the ousted president. So why is this so? And how are things different from when Colonel Henry Damiba was president?
To this question, I'm going to jump back a little bit to address some of the comments that my co-panelists just made with regard to the genesis of this situation.
Yes.
He mentioned the deterioration of the situation under the military leadership of Burkina Faso. He also mentioned the fact that under Blaise Compaoré, the situation was much stable. Well, I hear that kind of a comment most often when we're discussing Burkina Faso, especially in light of what is going on right now, as if the military coups were actually the reason why we are where we are today. Actually, I want to suggest another reading of the situation. We have military coups because we have someone who has been in power for over 27 years and has failed to pose the basic ways of securing the country. And when he and don't forget that Blaise Compaoré was actually involved, highly, deeply involved in peace negotiations across West Africa. And during that time, terrorists from Mali, from all the way to the desert in Mauritania or even Algeria, were coming to Burkina Faso as it's like the place where they will come and negotiate with the authorities. When there were people who were arrested in the desert, kidnapping happening, Burkina Faso was involved in negotiating and freeing those kidnapped persons. So it didn't start today. So, and the first attack in Burkina Faso happened in 2015, right after the transition, and we elected our first civilian president. For the first time in the history of the country, we now have a civilian leader, and boom, we have a terrorist attack in the center of the city. That's how it started, and it just never stopped. It just went on and on until Damiba said, look, I need to take over. I need to come and stop this because the civilians are not managing this right, because we need to have a full-scale battle to be able to stop this manslaughter. Unfortunately, President Damiba had also failed because when he arrived, there were so many things that he did not control. And I think the army, for the last 30 years of the history of Burkina Faso, has never been an army that is Republican. It has not been an army that was standing there to defend the territory, to protect the civilians. It was an army that was there to protect a leader, to make sure the interests of a certain group of people are protected. That is the problem. So now today we have an army that is kind of like rebuilding. This is an army that is building, an army that has to rebuild, an army that has to face a lot of challenges, an army that has to also face its international partners not backing it up. We have an army that has to actually go back to the people and secure the necessary means to be able to defend the country. And when we look at the increasing amount of violence that is happening today, and when you look at the platform like ACLED and so on that are providing data on what is happening, there's no differentiation between military operations creating violence and terrorist operations creating violence. Over the past month, there has been a lot of military operations that have neutralized hundreds of terrorists, and that is accounted for violence happening in the country. So if you were to put a point on the map at each day, on each time there has been such kind of a military operations, then you will see that Burkina is all red. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at it from a different angle, it is actually the army securing, pushing the terrorists out and gaining more ground. So today we cannot rightly say that the army does not control 40% of the territory. They do control more than that. But the fact of the matter is that they are not able to put people in because you don't put the internally displaced people might not want to just go back to their hometowns if there is no supporting programs to help them to go back. So I think that too is part of the narratives that we need to begin to unpack.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ouedraogo, for clearing the air there. Now, Mousbaou, let's look at the Sahel region and Burkina Faso's neighbors. Its neighboring countries such as Mali, they've also been affected by insurgency. And we'd also seen the Operation Barkhane wind down there. The French have withdrawn from Mali. How much of a connection is there in what is happening in Burkina Faso and its neighboring countries, Guinea and also Mali? How do they have any effects in efforts to combat jihadist terrorists in Burkina?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I think we're all facing the same problem, the problem of terrorism in our, borders. Then we all encounter the same problems with Mali, Niger, and Guinea. So now, I believe that the same questions that we will have to ask ourselves: what's really going on, and how do we face the problem? Well, this day we're really so blessed that now the president, those people are working now together and to face probably the questions. And we still need to do a lot. We still need to do a lot because much has to be done. It's not clear, and the connection, and the president even said it yesterday. The connection is not too close, and we believe in days to come, we will have strong connection between those countries so that we can fight together against terrorism.
Thank you very much, Mousbaou. Now, Dr. Kwaja, I mean, it's a terrible situation what we're witnessing in Burkina Faso. What effects this terrorist attacks had on the lives of the people? What's the humanitarian situation like in Burkina?
First, we need to appreciate the context of the humanitarian crisis in Burkina Faso along several key indicators. The first is that people die, people are injured, people are displaced. There's a huge and deep psychic injury that affects the loved ones of the bereaved. There is a huge issue of dislocation from sources of livelihood that affects individuals that are right now displaced, no work to do, no food to eat. Tomorrow is uncertain. But above all, is that we are also dealing with a situation where this unfortunate incident is happening within a country that is highly fragile. Fragile in the sense that the country itself is not able and even showing the capacity to provide for the welfare of generality of the people. The generality of the people are living in permanent uncertainty at two levels. First, responsibility to provide for their welfare is absent. Responsibility to provide for their security is absent. All these conditions drive people to a state of desperation. And when they are driven to a state of desperation, as we see, then the whole question of conflict between state and the citizens becomes the order of the day. And these are all the conditions that make radicalization easy. These are all the conditions that make people, young men and women, that ordinarily should contribute to the growth of the society to resort to joining violent extremist groups. And the point I'm making simply is that because the government of Burkina Faso is failing to provide for its citizens, the citizens are now forced to look inward to provide for themselves. And even if it means fighting the state in order to survive, they see resilience and coping mechanisms from that angle. And it raises a very serious national and regional security challenge that also requires more proactive and concerted effort on the part of the international community. ECOWAS, the African Union, should begin to play more proactive role in salvaging the situation. Today, we are talking of Burkina Faso. Tomorrow, we don't know which country we'll be talking about, because the fluidity with which people move, criminal groups move from one country to the other, makes the situation in Burkina Faso a regional situation to deal with. It will move from a Burkina Faso humanitarian crisis to a West African humanitarian crisis.
Thank you, Dr. Kwaja. And nobody wants that to happen. So when we return from this break, we'll be looking at international efforts in supporting Burkina Faso and also possible solutions to addressing the rising insecurity in the country. Do stay with us. This is Secure the Continent on News Central Television. We'll be right back after this break. Thank you for staying with us and Secure the Continent on News Central Television. We've been discussing the security situation in Burkina Faso as 150 civilians were massacred by uniformed men a few weeks ago. And to discussing this issue with us, we have Mousbaou Shittou, a journalist who's joined us live from Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. We also have Dr. Lassanr Ouedraogo, a research fellow at the Center for Development and Democracy in Nigeria, and also Dr. Kwaja, Associate Professor, Center for Peace and Security Studies at the Modibbo Adama University in Northeast Nigeria, Yola. Gentlemen, thanks for staying with us on the program. Now, Dr. Ouedraogo, Dr. Kwaja did talk a bit about concerted efforts by the international community and also the risk of this conflict spilling over to coastal states of West Africa and the fluidity in which this, violent extremist groups move. So the whole world cannot afford to let Burkina Faso spiral into complete violence. What is the international community doing about Burkina Faso? How are they responding to the ongoing conflict in Burkina Faso? And are they playing any role, looking at the African Union, ECOWAS, are they helping in any way to help combat violent extremism in Burkina Faso?
Well, I think he got a good point in terms of wanting the international community and our own African Union to be a major stakeholder in the conflict, not just in Burkina Faso, but also in the entire sub-region, say in Mali, in Niger, because what is happening in those countries will definitely going to impact other countries. So there is no safe zone in West Africa when one of these countries is burning down. So that is definitely a point to be made. And I believe that the Burkinabe leadership from President Kabore to President Traore have always sought the help from ECOWAS, but also from the African Union. They have addressed that to those bodies, but they have also addressed to neighboring countries such as Ghana, such as Cote d'Ivoire. But until recently, there has not been any positive response from those partners. But recently, I'm happy to report that countries like Cote d'Ivoire are actually working with Burkina Faso to some extent. We have seen in recent weeks that Cote d'Ivoire had actually gifted transportation material to the military and weapons and so on. That is very important. What Burkinabes are asking from the international community is not something that is not doable. It's something that is quite doable. It's just assist them in providing weapons to help them secure the country. So this is one of the poorest countries, economically speaking, when you look at in terms of GDP and so on. It's one of the poorest country in the region. So if one of the poorest countries are undergoing this kind of conflict, you would hope that by now the African Union or the ECOWAS would have been quick to respond in terms of like, okay, let's help President Kabore secure his country. Let's help President Damiba secure the country. Let's help President Traore secure the country. But there hasn't been something like that.
Is it that they don't have the capacity to financially and they don't have the willpower? And in what ways, what sort of help would you want? Is it the type that Côte d'Ivoire is currently providing to Burkina? Or how can they help? Is it troops or materials?
The type of help that Burkina needs today is material, military equipment. But beyond the military equipment, Burkina Faso needs humanitarian assistance in terms of helping the over 2 million internally displaced. But beyond that, it's quite important for Burkina to receive help in terms of helping the internally displaced people to go back to their towns and villages, and to also help the government secure the zones where people are really, really desperate, and youth unemployment is skyrocketing in certain places. And if you don't have a job, then you're likely to join the terrorists when they come pressuring you to join them. That's what happened to a lot of people in the Sahel region broadly. So a lot of young people did not join because they were enticed by the ideology. They were joined because they were convinced of some sort of material gain. So that is definitely part of it. And even when the Traoré regime succeeds in driving them out, they're going to need support in terms of creating jobs, in terms of creating some sort of a industry in that region, developing the agriculture, mechanizing it, and allowing the youth to have jobs. If they do not do that, then we're just going to have the problem again. Because if these terrorists are able to secure some zones, they're able to extract natural resources such as gold, they are able to control traffic.
Hello, Dr. Ouedraogo. I think we lost you. Okay, good to have you back. I'll just let you complete your thoughts. Yes.
Oh, so I was okay. So I was pretty much saying that it is really important for African Union and ECOWAS to look beyond military support, to also look into like a humanitarian support that will allow Burkina Faso to develop industry, whether it's in the domain of agriculture or other forms of industry in those affected areas, specifically the Sahel region, to allow the youth from that region to be able to have jobs that will sustain them, or else when we drive out the terrorists, then, and if the youth are not employed, there is a high likelihood of them returning to terrorism.
Thank you very much. And of course, if the economic issues are not addressed, it would leave a vacuum. I mean, it's just recipe for disaster. So apart from the military approach, they also need to look at the economic drivers of this conflict. Now, Mousbaou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré came in with a lot of hope, saying, let's change the way things are, and he's tweaked things a bit. And some will say, he's done quite a lot when it comes to addressing violent extremism in Burkina Faso. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing Burkina Faso in addressing the issues of violent extremism in the country? And what steps can be taken to overcome some of these issues as we speak?
Okay, thank you so much. Well, according to him, when he was threatening to be the president or for this transition, he was willing to have 3 or 4 months to do the job by God willing, and they will go to elections. But seeing the situation of the country currently, we see that we still need a lot to be done. And one of the biggest challenges they have is the collaboration with the population. At a given moment, we find out that even the population has given up in giving the need to, meaningful information they need to track those terrorists in the different villages. It's like the population even itself is collaborating with terrorism, and then we have a serious problem. Secondly, as Mr. Lassanr Ouedraogo had just mentioned, economically, we lack a lot, in fact. Burkina Faso is one of the most poorest countries in the world. And we have to understand that we need really a lot of equipment to fight really against terrorism. And we believe that if we have the best materials, our men and the defense volunteers will do the job. But what's really happened today? Even those who are crying that we have to go to elections, they are not ready to help the country. And then we can even, talk about France and the European nations that today are talking, we have this and that in our country. What are they doing specifically to help the country to get out of this hell? And secondly, what is the, international, organizations are doing as far as ECOWAS and African Union are concerned? You can all witness that until now, nothing has been done seriously. And thanks God, Côte d'Ivoire is not reacting properly to this. So we still need our partners to support us in giving materials and human resources too. And you know that today the most problem is the humanitarian and also crisis that we are facing. Then we really need a lot. If we have the needful materials, we have financial support from our partners and the support of the population, well, we believe that the needful will be done. And as he had just said yesterday, the president said yesterday that we are just at the introductory level. We still need a lot to do. This is just one part of the deal. And we believe, very soon, biggest project will be done on the field and we'll come back to the normal life.
Now, Mousbaou, just before I move to Dr. Kwaja, I also want to know the geography of this violent extremism. Because Ouagadougou has been spared of most of the violence, and is this just restricted to the northern part of Burkina Faso? What are other big cities like?
Well, it's not, even Ouagadougou is not safe, really, but we believe that, currently, we still thank God that around the city of Ouagadougou is still doing well. But it's not only restricted to the north part. We have the east part of the country, and we have one of the biggest, city there called Fada, which also, have been really impacted negatively by this terrorism. We have Yola, which is not far from the south, that also has really registered the attacks there recently. Well, most of those parts of Burkina have been touched. We think that it's only left with the center, Ouagadougou. Yes. Otherwise, the surrounding cities all have been touched in one way. But we believe that, well, with great job, our men will do the job and we come back to the normal life.
Thank you, Mousbaou. Now, Dr. Kwaja, as we begin to wind down our conversation, is this a winnable war? What are the long-term prospects for peace and stability in Burkina Faso, and what steps need to be taken to achieve lasting security?
The first step that need to be taken is that regardless of who is in power in Burkina Faso right now, the fact that such an individual is demonstrating high level of incapacity in terms of how he protects the citizens of Burkina Faso makes it very important and also urgent for the international community to respond. I am not a supporter of the international community responding, especially when the situation
sorry to interrupt you. When you say respond, is it in terms of support or providing equipment or boots on ground? What sort of support are you suggesting?
That's the point that was the point I was coming to. There are two sides of the response. Now, where the government of Burkina Faso is failing completely in terms of its capacity to protect, then I am 100% in support of boots on the ground. The UN should activate Chapter 7 in terms of deploying a peacekeeping force, but I am not subscribing to that for now. Let ECOWAS and the African Union take responsibility. We've been talking about African solutions to African problems. Burkina Faso provides Africa with that opportunity to demonstrate to the world that they have the capacity to respond with homegrown solutions to the problems that we have in Burkina Faso. We can use that as a template. And I think lessons from Liberia and Sierra Leone with ECOWAS are key models that we can leverage on. The second is that it is not enough to deal with poverty as a way of addressing this issue. Yes, poverty can be one factor. Even if you have a situation where the government is providing for all the needs of the people, but such a government is authoritarian in nature, you will still find its contents. And when you read the book of Ted Gore in 2011, Why Men Rebel, the book was talking about the kind of situation we confront in Burkina Faso today, where citizens are challenging state authority. There is an ideological component to it, there is a political component to it, there is a cultural component to it, and there is a social component to it. The social component to it might be driven by poverty and social inclusion, but the political, which is more about governance, is something that needs to be dealt with internally. And there is also the component of the G5 Sahel coming together to support that region. Burkina Faso might not be as active as we see when it comes to Mali, Chad, Niger in that context. But I think there is a need to rally around to provide support to countries.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kwaja. Mousbaou Shittou, thank you for your time. And also Dr. Lassanr Ouedraogo. It was an interesting discussion, and I appreciate your time and insights on the program. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Sure.